some Bach. Nice to be the warm-up band for the maestro.
May I join you? Amit Palet, ladies and gentlemen. You probably guessed. So, actually, may I join you? Play another piece? Okay.
This is a Swan by Saint-Saëns.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second concert of the season. Very different from the last one. There's classical music on this one. There was a bit on the last one. And two major, meaty, beefy, late romantic pieces. Kind of similar, very similar in orchestration, actually, instrumentation. And written only about 15 years apart. Brahms was actually a mentor of Dvorak and helped him start his career. In fact, he introduced Dvorak to his own publisher, who was really impressed with his work, and that's where it all started. And they really became friends. So Amit Pellet I've worked with, I think 4 or 5 times. And actually the first time, a number of years ago now, was indeed the Dvorak Cello Concerto. That was our first collaboration, wasn't it? Yeah. And this piece is, well, I'll let you speak about it, but certainly kind of the pinnacle of cello repertoire in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a to-go-to piece. That proves if you're a cellist or not, if you play this piece. We all want to play it from day one. I remember when I was a student, I worked on it with my teacher, and back then he said, well, I've performed it about 250 times. And I went home and I said, well, that's not much. But then I thought about it. Wait. 250 times. And he said, I was never bored of it. It's always difficult. I always love it. I always get fresh when I play it. And I always have to practice every single note of it. So then I started counting what pieces have I played around 250 times. And back then it was all the pieces together. Maybe I've been on stage 250 times. But when I tell this story to my students, they don't understand the grasp of so many times to be on stage with one piece. And I'm still probably around 100 with this piece, but I just love it, and it's never boring. And even last night playing it, waking up to today, doing my scale and exercise, and then practicing the piece, there are always new things, there are always new ideas, new fingerings, so get ready.
Well, actually, that does bring up something about Amit, which is mainly a compliment, I think, which is that he is, in a way, quite tricky to accompany. That isn't the compliment. That's the difficult part.
I see it as a compliment.
But the reason is that he never does the same thing twice, and that is a compliment because it really does seem when you play as though it's spontaneous. And music making should seem, spontaneous. But of course, there's a sort of irony here because in order to make it seem spontaneous, you have to be incredibly prepared, right? And maybe you could talk a little bit to both those things, maybe your feeling of the spontaneity and also your preparation in general.
Well, the spontaneity is actually you have to deliver who you are as a person in front of the audience, and you are never the same. Think of it as a speech by the president, let's say 8 p.m., CNN, Fox, whatever you watch, and they deliver a very dramatic speech. Now, a good talker will make it in a way that all their advisors and all the people that work with them, they even have a room in the White House where they practice it. So somebody writes it for them, and they practice it in front of people, but then the deliberation of it, the people that are really good at it, they will do something. Move their hands, look down, acknowledge the camera, do something that was not prepared or not practiced in a way, in the normal way, but that's what we remember. So those magical moments when we deliver a speech, and music is the same, those magical moments should be practiced all the time, but the moment we walk on stage should be forgotten immediately. So you let your subconscious take over. However, subconscious is ignited by knowledge. So the more I practice, the more I have options that I can not only do on the cello, but also verbalize for me and for my students. The more I do that, the less I have to think on stage and just let it happen. But it's never just whatever, no.
So, you talk a lot about, can you tell us a bit about when you say your students, you have a studio at Peabody, is that right?
Yeah, I teach at Peabody Conservatory, which is part of Johns Hopkins. And I've been there now 19 years. So I started when some of my students were older than me. And the thing about students, they always stay the same age.
Yeah, that's right.
You get older.
I know.
But I simply love it. I call it the triangle of my life, actually, which is to teach, to perform, and to have a family. I have 3 kids and a wife, and we're very happy. I'm actually very sad because I'm going to miss my flight tonight back home. So I have to get to tomorrow and miss the morning where I should have taken them to school. So this is really upsetting. But you're going to make up with a good drink and steak after the concert. So yes, this triangle, this balancing between performing but also teaching, sharing the knowledge with students in a high level and having as much as possible normal life is what keeps me going and what I love. I don't like to just perform or just teach or just be at home. I like the combination. It's always hard to balance it.
Right, right. So should we talk a little bit about this particular piece? I mean, maybe about the piece itself. I know it's one of your favorites, one of my favorites now. It actually didn't used to be. It's really grown on me considerably.
Well, it's, first of all, technically, it's probably the hardest cello concerto we have, period. It's just, the challenges that we have there are never getting easy. It's just, as what I call as a musical athlete, one has to really be in great shape just to tackle the notes that are written there, and also the stamina, which people don't think about, but this is really like running a marathon. And if you don't plan your moves, you can be dead tired after the exposition of the first movement. And that has happened to me. And that happens to my students. Also the sound production. When you have such a massive orchestra behind you that always plays almost equally to you, you just have to produce sound that is much bigger than a normal sound. It's the difference between an actor talking in a theater and enunciating every word, or in the cinema where you have the microphones right next to you and you can whisper basically and still get through. So when you play this concerto, you have to shout even when you whisper so the audience can hear it, simply can hear it. And that's a challenge by itself. But then comes the musical challenge, which is the hardest one, and that's to deliver a story. And there is a story here. Dvorak was in New York in 1894-95. In the summer, he started writing this concerto. First, he was influenced by Victor Herbert's cello concerto. Victor Herbert was a great cellist of that time and composer. You might know his operettas, Victor Herbert. He wrote his cello concerto for himself. He was a great cellist. And Dvorak, being his buddy, came to the premiere and heard that piece and was so blown away by it that he decided to start his own cello concerto. And at the same time, the other storyline here is that Dvorak got a letter from home, from Prague, where he was from Josephine. Josephine was his sister-in-law, his young sister-in-law, who he was all his adult life in love with. But he had to marry her older sister because that was the tradition of the time. He wanted to marry Josephine. The father said no. He ended up marrying her older sister. They moved to America. They had 7 kids. But when he got this letter, Josephine, who was a singer also, writes that she's sick. And he decides to leave everything and to go back home to visit her and to tell her that he loves her. And while he's doing it, of course, there's no planes. He's taking a boat. And that takes a few weeks. And he's writing this piece. So you will hear at the beginning of the piece this heroic, majestic opening. That's the first movement. Like you say, I'm in the top of the world. Then comes the second movement where he's on the boat and he's really in love and anticipating telling her this after all those years. And he's using a theme that we call the Josephine theme because it's the same theme he used in a song that he wrote for her many years earlier. And that song is part of 6 songs group. This song is, the name of the song is Coming Home. And that's the theme of the song. Then it goes to the third movement where the anticipation gets to a climax. And the true story is that he wrote a beautiful, happy ending, Hollywood-like ending to the piece. But when he got there, she died already. And he teared apart that ending and wrote what we both think is the most beautiful, tragic ending to a cello concerto in the repertoire. As sad as he was, we are, I'm sorry to say it, happy now as artists because we got the most amazing ending of a piece.
I mean, it is so poignant, and it's sort of miraculous that the first theme he just played from the first movement, this really exultant, majestic, as you put it, music, is exactly the same tune as the poignant ending. I mean, the transformation, don't play it because I want them to hear it for them. The fact that it's the same tune is just incredible to me. I mean, it's completely transformed. It is really a most touching ending. You know, you were saying about the size of this concerto. It's about 45 minutes, I think, isn't it? Maybe even, yeah, it's a big piece. It's the first, and maybe I think Amit will talk to us a little bit about the technical elements, which makes it a first. It's not the first cello concerto ever written, but it's the first big one of this nature. And it's also the first whereby the orchestra is really, as you were alluded to, it's in combination. It's not just an orchestral accompaniment as a vehicle for his virtuosity. It really is a dialogue. And the opening, it must be nerve-wracking for you because the opening is just the orchestra for about 3 or 4 minutes. And you're just waiting, right?
Yeah. It's nerve-wracking, but it's also your adrenaline kicks in and you're getting excited.
Yeah.
It's a thrilling feeling as well.
And there are so many dialogues with particular instruments of the orchestra and the cellist. The horn has a huge one, the flute, the clarinet, and of course the concertmaster. Maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah, the concertmaster has the job of Josephine. So until the third movement, she's quiet. But when he reach home, there's a big duet with the concertmaster, which you will hear. It's very optimistic and happy. And there are only 2 of them. One is optimistic and the other one is at the end, when death approaches, and then you have this really touching, sad duet between the 2. But that's also very rare that you use only the concertmaster to play solo with the soloist in a concerto, and that's definitely thinking of Josephine. And also the part of communication. You know, music is about, for me at least, is always about listening, but also communicating. So when I come to a town and I play with an orchestra, I still cannot tell you the names of the players. However, we have discussed very deeply a lot of emotions in the last 4 or 5 days. So even though, because I sit in front and I cannot see the flute player, I've had some very intimate dialogues with the flute player and the clarinet player and the concertmaster, and it's a beautiful way through music to get to know the community and to get to know the orchestra. So it's really fun to do it as a musician.
That's really nice to hear. So when we first met, you were playing on a different cello. In fact, a cello which belonged to no lesser a musical figure as the Pablo Casals, the great 19th, 20th century cellist. Do you want to? I mean, it's amazing to have been playing that cello. Can you tell the audience about that?
So in 2012, I got to meet Pablo Casals' widow, who's still alive. He was 81 when she was 24 when they got married. So you understand the. Lucky him, because she's gorgeous. And she's now 85 and lives in Washington. She used to run the Kennedy Center, Marta Casals Istomin. And in 2012, I had the honor to audition for her, simply to come and play for her. And that audition turned into a very tough lesson where she teared me apart. And after that, she said, Amit, well, let's have a glass of wine. Sure. So we did, and she said, you know, you're a big guy, and the maestro, as she refers to him still, maestro was very small, but would you like to try his cello? I said, of course, why not? And I did. I tried it, and even though it was a sleep for many years, I grew up on his recordings, and that was like a dream. And I ended up playing on it for 6 years, and literally taking it all over the world with me. And then I gave it back to her. It was a deal for 1 year, but she never called me to return it. So it ended up being 6 years. And I miss it, but what she told me was to do 2 things: to share his legacy, but also to find my own voice. And at the beginning, I thought to find my voice, meaning, take the cello and sound like him, which is not possible. But slowly I understood that finding my voice is not really my cello voice. It's my voice as a musician and my job as a musician in the world. And I found through this cello that going to anywhere that wants me to go, play, talk to people, play to kids. I played in a middle school here on Friday, trying to share music the same as he did. Pablo Casals I found programs that he played in Duluth, Minnesota, in Tucson, Arizona, you name it, he was there. He used to travel the States once a year. He would go to New York with a boat and then stop on every stop of the train for 3 months until he got to San Francisco. And that's how they did it. And he played in every small community. Some of them kept the programs, so I had the pleasure of reviving them 100 years after, exactly. Same program on the same cello, which was really cool to do. And I discovered not only that, for instance, back to Duluth, one of the reviews there, of course, praised his playing, but praised even more so the fact that he stayed for an hour and a half to speak to every member of the audience. Now, when you think of Pablo Casals, this was in 1918. In 1918, he was the Beatles of the time. I mean, there was nothing more than him. He was such a superstar that today there would be bodyguards and no way that you get even backstage to talk to them. He stayed and talked to and he did it every night. They played every single night. As I said, they would stop. So when you read this and you realize it and you hold his instrument, you realize that our job here is really to share music and not just to be snobs and to play only in Carnegie Hall, which is also nice, I have to say.
So you gave the cello back?
I gave it back, and then I got this cello, which is not bad, it's actually older. This is from 1695, this instrument. And I call it my pandemic cello because I received it about a year ago during the hardcore of the pandemic. A dealer in Boston basically gave it to me because they didn't have any business. And he wanted the cello to be played because that's what needs to be done with those instruments. And of course, he knew that I would fall in love with it. And we'll try to find a way to have it. Of course, we musicians cannot afford it. It's not even close to what we make. But I can hardly afford the plane tickets that I have to pay for this. But there's a foundation close to where I live that decided to buy it with 2 terms, basically. One, that I will be the person to use it, and 2 is that the owners of this foundation, whenever they want me to come and play in their house, I have to come. So I agreed to both.
Yeah, but not in half an hour.
Well, if they want me to come, they have a private jet. If they bring it, I'm gone.
So actually, a footnote on this, you can't even, when he says you can't, jokingly, sort of, you can't even afford the ticket, you can't put these instruments in the hold, you have to buy, every time you go somewhere, you have to buy 2 tickets, right?
Yeah, you have to buy a seat for the cello. It sits next to me, and being 6'5", it helps because I can put my legs under and lean on it. But the best part, and that's a serious part, is that I get the miles for the cello. Oh. So yeah. I get double the status.
That's deserved. Yeah. That's great. Ladies and gents, we have just a few minutes. Any questions for either of us? Surely.
Not everybody together.
Whose cello was it before?
Yeah, this cello, so this is a Grancino cello that was made in Italy. And the previous owner was a French cellist who immigrated to this country in 1918 and played in the Boston Symphony first, and then moved to Detroit and was the principal cellist of Detroit Symphony for many, many years, and retired by being the cello professor at Eastman School of Music, Eastman in Rochester. And there are quite a few recordings of him on this cello. And his wife, from the Longi family in Boston, was Leonard Bernstein piano teacher. And that's why the cello ended up in Boston. And I like to call this cello shoko, because shoko in Hebrew, my mother tongue, means hot chocolate. And I felt from the first time I put the bow on it that this is like drinking hot chocolate on a cold day. That's the feeling I had when playing this cello. So I hope you like the sound of it. I do, and yeah, that's it.
What are the challenges going from one cello to another?
Well, with these old instruments, actually the biggest challenge is to have the experience with those instruments that you cannot disturb them in order to make them sound. You cannot push it. If you push the sound on an instrument like this, you kill it, basically. And I can show you, actually. So even some of you, I'm sure, not musicians, but even I'll show you two ways that I approach the cello. If I sit completely straight, yeah, and I play, let's say I play this note. Now, while I'm playing it, I'm going to bounce my lower back and use weight into my playing. And tell me if you hear a difference. So this is one way with my elbows high and back inside. Here one is like E and the other one is Ah. That's just one way of treating an instrument. If I'm tight, such a good instrument will give me a tight sound. So if you try it and you don't know how to play it, you might think it's not a good cello. If you play it. Now, the speed of the bow, for instance. You know, sound is created by the weight you put on the string and how fast you move it. So if you put the bow, even if you're relaxed and you play with a slow bow, or so I can be tight and slow bow, tight and fast bow, relax. You hear the difference?
Yeah.
So that's just a little part of it, but it's like a really good horse and a jockey riding it. Any sniff of a person that knows a horse will make the horse react. The knee, both knees, the feet, same with the cello. Any way I will play, even another example, if I put the cello inside my knees and I play, or if I open it, big difference.
It's amazing, yeah.
So when you make music, you can adjust those things like a painter. You can start by playing with a tight sound. Open. So when you see me today doing all the things,
It's not showing off, no.
it's not showing off. No, this is really the poetry of creating colors with an instrument. Is only when you understand those sensitivity, which is very hard to understand. I mean, you have to be. That's why when my students say, "Oh, I want an old Italian instrument, then I will make a career." No, I played until I was 26 on a $3,000 cello. It was fine, and you learn the craft. And slowly after, you can really start to peel all these levels of beauty and poetry. And it takes lifetime. I mean, every single day I find new ways to make colors, and the cello give it to me. So slight change of elbow posture can create different color. And sometimes I'm only aware of it because it just happened, and then I hear it.
Oh. I'd like to keep going, this is great, but we got to get dressed and get ready. Yeah? Thank you, Amit, so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers, welcome to Fargo-Moorhead Symphony Orchestra's second Masterwork series of the season. I have with me today Amit Pellet, who is our soloist for this concert. Amit, welcome.
Great to be here.
Your
Thanks
first
for having
time,
me.
I think, to
Yeah,
Fargo.
my
at
first
least
time
for
to
the
Fargo, even though I've been in North Dakota a few times. The last one in Devil's Lake. I played a recital and actually stopped in Fargo just to have lunch. But this is my debut playing here music.
Well, it's great to have you. And, of course, we are not strangers to each other. I think this is maybe our fifth collaboration.
Yeah, fifth time that we played together.
That's right.
So we're covering the majority of the
Yes,
cello
right.
repertoire.
And the first one, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, was indeed the Dvorak Cello Concerto.
Yeah, it's a fond memory
Right, me
that I
too.
have. Was wonderful experience. I've done it so many times, but some of them pops out, and this is definitely
I'm
one
pleased
of them.
about that. Well, let's hope that will be replicated this evening. So, you know, many of the audience will know that this is a special piece, but maybe many of them have not heard the piece before. It is a gigantic concerto. It is kind of a watershed piece for this instrument. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that is and what do you think of the piece?
Well, I think I agree with you. This is the cello concerto, probably the most difficult, the most famous one, and the hardest one. Probably also the span of it, 45 minutes of the scale of emotions that we have to go through. Playing it and listening to it is more than any other concerto I know. So it's really a journey for everybody involved, performers and audience. When Dvorak wrote it in 1894-95, there were not so many concertos in that scale, in that magnitude, not for the cello for sure. And after this concerto, composers knew that it's possible to do that. And then we have all these beautiful, majestic pieces of the 20th century. So this is a turning point in the history of cello.
Because maybe Dvorak sort of showed what the instrument was capable of.
Exactly. So
in a way.
the cello,
Yeah.
as you will hear in the concerts, represent really the human voice, because you have the low, like a grandpa, and the high, like a baby, and everything in between. And that's the beauty of it. And Dvorak was the first one to take advantage of it and to write very low, very high, mixed together, double stops, 2 notes at the same time, very fast, very slow, and also to have a background story behind it. So it was programmatic music, which is rare to have on a cello.
Tell us that story.
Yeah, so the story is that Dvorak, who came from Prague in Europe, was in America back then. He lived in New York, and he had a family, a wife and 7 kids. But when he got married, he married the person maybe he didn't want to marry. He married the oldest daughter of a family where he really was in love with the youngest daughter. And the youngest daughter, her name was Josephine. She was a singer. He was introduced to this family by writing 6 songs for this lady, Josephine. One of them is called Coming Home. And that song is the main theme of the second movement of the cello concerto. And the reason for that is that Dvorak, having to marry the older sister, because that was the father said and was the custom of the time, got a letter in 1894 from Josephine saying that she is sick back home in Prague, and he decides to go back and to tell her that he loves her and he wants to be with her for the rest of his life, to leave everything behind. And while he's doing it, he's writing this beautiful romantic piece, not knowing that at the end of the journey, when the boat will arrive in Prague, she will be already dead. And that tore him apart. He had to change the end of the piece from beautiful, happy ending to sad, tragic ending.
You know, no one, that really actually helps contextualize the end. And of course, no one, it's a tragic story and no one wants someone to die, of course, but that ending now, I mean, that is one of the most special, to me actually, possibly the greatest moment of the piece, the way.
Absolutely.
And he takes the big majestic tune, of course you know this, of the first movement and completely transforms it into this poignant, so poignant moment at the end. I mean, it is truly expressive.
Yeah, and not only that, he adds the concertmeister a solo violin 2 times at the end of the piece, which represent Josephine, and one of them is very happy and sort of looking forward to the meeting, and the other one with death in mind. And I always like to, not to joke, but to share with my students at least that we are lucky that this happened to him because of that tragic life event, we got this beautiful ending to a piece. Of course, that's very hard to say, but we are thankful for this music. It's so beautiful. So when we start the journey, people should know it's worthwhile waiting for the end.
Yes, absolutely right. You know, it's funny what you said about the range, of course, of the cello and how Dvorak exploits that. I read quite recently, something I didn't know, that he was a little reticent to write a cello concerto. That's why it's one of his very last pieces, because he actually didn't really like the sound of the cello other than its middle register. Yeah. And yet, he really exploits, as you just said, very high, very low. So obviously something changed. He was inspired by something, was he not?
He was inspired specifically by Victor Herbert, who was a good friend, a buddy of his in New York, and both of them worked at the New York Conservatory of Music. And Victor Herbert was the best American cellist of the time. He was so successful both as a composer as a cellist. So he wrote his cello concerto exactly then, and he invited Dvorak to the performance, to the premiere. Dvorak came just because he's a friend, thinking that, oh, here we go again, I'll hear a cello and, you know, the high squeezing noise and the low muddling. But he heard Victor Herbert playing, and he was such a great cellist, and he was blown away by the capabilities of the instrument. Not only the technique part of it, but also the singing part, because the second movement of Victor Herbert Cello Concerto is also in B minor, and it's also dedicated to a singer, to Victor Herbert's wife, who was a singer back then in the opera in New York. And it's just a gorgeous song from beginning to end. And Dvorak takes that mode and says, okay, if you can write to your wife, I'll write to Josephine.
Yeah, that's quite, and it's true, the second movement is just an outpouring of melody, one after the other, it seems. So, talking about the cello, I personally know, and I think our listeners would love to hear the story, perhaps behind this cello of yours, but also when we first met and we collaborated, you were playing on the cello that belonged to Pablo Casals himself. Do you want to tell a little bit about that? Because that's a fascinating story.
Absolutely. Well, Pablo Casals was the greatest cellist, maybe of all time, definitely of the turn of the 19th century and 20th century. A very important figure in the music world and in the world itself. He got a Peace Award from the United Nations for taking care of refugees in the time of Franco in Spain. He never entered Spain while Franco was in power because of his political ideas. And he was a strong personality and a phenomenal cellist. And in 1913, he bought a cello, a Goffriller cello, and played on it until he died in 1973. In 2012, I received that cello from his widow, who is still alive. She's now 85. And played on it for 6 years. One of the concerts were with you. And there were amazing 6 years of exploring the legacy of Pablo Casals, but also finding my own voice through that cello. Mrs. Casals told me when I got the cello, go out there, share his legacy, the maestro's legacy, but also find your own voice. And I figured out that, apropos Devil's Lake, when I went there, I played on that cello, and I found out that my voice was to really share music anywhere I can in the world, not just in big concert hall and just for people sometimes who just want to be seen in that concert hall, and to go anywhere I can, because Pablo Casals did it. I found programs that he played in Duluth, Minnesota, in Tucson, Arizona, you name it, he played there. He would do a tour of the United States starting in New York, and then would take 3 months and would take the train and stop on every stop on the way to San Francisco. Wow. And play in every town. And he would do that, and that's a lesson for me. If he could do it, share music in such a way, I could as well. And this morning, for instance, I went to the middle school here in Fargo and played for the kids, to see the joy on their faces, to see the smiles, the questions they asked. That gives me a lot of pleasure, and that's, I think, what she meant, and that's what I found.
That's great to hear. And so, but then, of course, you had to return the cello at some point. And what brought you to this one?
Well, this I call is my pandemic cello. This cello is actually older. It was made in 1695. Took a while for the kids today in the school to figure out how old it is.
Yeah, and it's
But
making me think what cello concertos were around, you know?
Well, nothing.
Not really anything.
No. So this was made before, 25 years before the first Bach suite that was written by Johann Sebastian Bach in 1720. The cello came to the US in 1918 with a cellist who came from Paris and played in the Boston Symphony and then was a principal cellist of the Detroit Symphony for many, many years. His wife was connected to the Longy family in Boston and was Leonard Bernstein piano teacher when he was a child. So it's a very musical family. The cello went for sale during the pandemic and nobody came into the shop in Boston to look even at it. So the dealer there, who is a friend of mine, shipped the cello to me knowing that I will fall in love with it. And just told me, you can play on it now because nobody comes in to the shop. I fell in love with it. I, of course, cannot afford it, so I asked around, and the generosity of the Rue Foundation in Virginia, they bought this cello with the notion that I will use it in the next years. And for them it's an investment. For me, it's a joy to share music. And I call this cello shoko, because shoko in Hebrew means hot chocolate. And the sound of this cello reminds me of just drinking hot chocolate on a cold day.
And kind of the look, actually, too. It's kind of dark.
Very dark, yeah. So
this
this is a wonderful cello, and I'm thankful that I played on the Casals cello before, because these old instruments, people think that you just put the bow on it and it gives you this majestic sound. No, you need to learn how not to disturb it. And the more experience you have doing that, the more colors the instrument will give you.
Learn how not to disturb it. It sounds like good advice for a conductor in an orchestra. Learn how not to disturb. A final thing I'd like to ask. I have to say we talked about this the other day, and I was sort of interested in your response. So one thing about Amit, not unique but special with him, is that, and it definitely, it's a sort of, it's mainly good, but it's it's sort of double-edged a bit. He never plays the same thing the same way. So he keeps conductors and orchestras definitely on their toes.
For sure.
What is particularly good about it, I think, is the fact that it makes the music making seem spontaneous, which is how it should be. I mean, it's a live performance. It's not, you're not a robot. We're not robots, and this is very special. But, and this is what you said the other day, and I never really thought about it this way. In order to be able to seem spontaneous, you have to be incredibly prepared, right?
Yeah.
And I just wondered whether you would like to talk to that a little bit and perhaps share a little bit about the preparation for it, maybe the practicing details.
Yeah, so I see it as a compliment, first of all.
It is a compliment.
That it's never the same. You know, when I tell my students, even in the lesson, to make that point, I say, can you say good morning? And they say good morning. And then I say, just say it again. And they say good morning or good morning. They don't mean it even, but it's always different. And I tell them, look, it's the same good morning. It's just two words, but they never sound the same. Why? Because you're not the same. You said it already. There's past to it now. So something sounds different about it. That's music. I mean, if I play this theme of Dvorak Concerto in the recapitulation when it comes back, and I'm not attuned to the fact that I already played it, and I just do it the same, something is, I am
and all the stuff you've been through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is very important to understand. A theme can have future and can have past, same as anything in life. But in order to be able to actually do it on the cello, I need to prepare, I need to practice like crazy. I'm a musical athlete, like any other athlete. If you go to a basketball game, NBA game, and you enter 2 hours before the game, all the players would be on the court warming up. 2 hours. 2 hours. And then they play, 48 minutes if you're LeBron James. Some of them don't play at all or play 20 minutes. But they warm up for 2 hours. They do stretches, they do shooting, they do so many things to warm up and to get into rhythm, as they call it. We do the same on the cello. Every morning I play at least 1 hour of scales and exercises that will allow me to be flexible enough to just let my subconscious take over. And for every phrase, like my great teacher Bernard Greenhouse used to say, for every phrase that you play, you should have 3 musical options in your pocket, so you can decide on the spot what you want to do with it. And the last point is that you really need to know the score very well, because of course, as you know as a conductor, if the orchestral part requires you not to take time, you cannot take time, meaning too many people are playing fast notes, for instance, or if the orchestra is just playing a chord, the composer is basically telling you, take time. You are allowed to, right here. And many other things. So this comes with experience, but also it comes with a knowledge that this is the art form that we are working on, is to make people excited, but we do it through sport, through being an athlete, through being able to move and play fast and slow. Every color change should be verbalized. One should be able to say, I'm changing now the color by making my bow go faster, or by using less hair, or by playing away from the bridge, or whatever it is. To verbalize it means I know what I'm doing. And that's a different story.
Yeah, right. And you said, I think, you know, when you've occasionally on your travels as a soloist stayed with, you know, on house stays or with families, and they hear your cello playing, they think, oh, he's going to play something beautiful, but in fact, it's warm-up stuff.
That happened many times, actually, that people, usually the sponsors, you know, they will get the honor to host the soloist, and they are really happy. And they wake up in the morning making coffee and breakfast, and then they're ready for me to just start the concert. But what do you know? It's just scales and it's exercises, and I have to explain to them. And then they're blown away when they come to the concert. They say, how do you play this when you did that? Well, that's how.
That's great. I mean, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm really looking forward to working with you this evening, and hope we do a great job.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.